Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Clayton Britt Show. Today we will be doing a NBA Finals Game 5 recap and Game 6 preview. So Game 5, the Warriors won 104-94 to take a 3-2 lead in the series. And the game was at the Chase Center in San Francisco. So this is a tough episode for me because I feel like the Celtics kind of blew it. And it hurts. It hurts a lot. We'll start kind of with a higher level overview of the game, and then we'll go into some more player stuff, and then we'll preview Game 6. So the Warriors came out hot, kind of as expected, and the Celtics started 0 for 10 from 3. And so the Warriors were up a good amount, and then the second quarter was mostly even. And then the Celtics did something which they haven't done, I think, yet in this series, which is they played a good third quarter. And so then they started making a bunch of shots. And at this point, I was so heavily invested in this game because they started clawing their way back. They held them down in the third. I was like, we can really do this thing. We can win. So when the Celtics, I think they made 9 or 10 threes in a row at one point in the third, I was objectively losing my mind. I think that actually might be an understate, yelling, going nuts, jumping all over the place because I was so fired up. And then Jordan Poole hits a big shot going into the fourth quarter. He hits pretty much like a half-court heave for 3. And so the Celtics had just played a great quarter, and they were still down 1 going into the fourth. And then they came out flat, and they scored so few points in the fourth. It was kind of pathetic, if I'm really being honest. And so it was just deflating because the Celtics had the momentum and were getting it going, and then normally they're great in the fourth and not as great in the third, and it was the opposite, and so they got my hopes up before they crushed my dreams. I was also extra devastated because I happened to place bets on Jason Tatum points over, and the line was 27.5, and I think Tatum scored like less than 4 points in the fourth quarter to have 27 points. So credit to Vegas on that one. I also had Celtics plus 4.5. And that obviously did not cover. I try and be careful with my emotions when betting. And so oftentimes I will hedge I will bet against my heart. And that way I put it in kind of a win-win situation where if the Celtics lose, then I win money. And the Celtics win, then the Celtics win. And so that's great. But I didn't do that this time. I had faith and I got heartbroken. So it was just really kind of sad. The Warriors only had 6 turnovers in the game versus the Celtics having 18, and that is the difference in the ball game. And so the Celtics, man, so brutal. I mean, you get so attached to the team and everything. But yeah, so we had talked ad nauseum about the Celtics turnover issues and how they have to have less than 15 if they want to win the game, and they have more than 15 and they lose. And the Celtics even fixed the rebounding issue from Game 5 where the Warriors had out-rebounded the Celtics largely because of Andrew Wiggins. And in this game, the Celtics out-rebounded them 47-39. And only one starter for the Warriors made a 3, which was Klay Thompson. And they were 9 of 40 from 3 as a team. And Steph Curry broke his streak of consecutive games and playoff games with a 3-pointer made. And the Celtics still lost by double digits. So, in previous losses, I have felt encouraged of the Celtics clearly did not bring their best stuff. And they still had a chance. But this time, I'm a little discouraged because their best player didn't play great. Steph had a terrible game by Steph's standards. So now kind of going into, or actually we'll continue on the higher level overview. The ball almost looked slippery for the Celtics. I don't know what was going on. Maybe it was nerves. But they only had 39 points in the first half, which is just pathetic again. But then they caught fire in the third, and they had 31 in the third quarter over the next 10 minutes. And the game was 70-67 with 2 minutes left. And then they scored 9 points in the next 10 minutes and 30 seconds. And I meant 2 minutes left in the third. So it went from 70-67 to 79-93. And I think one thing that was a common theme for me watching the game, I was watching it with my friend, Connor, which was poor Connor because he had to deal with my nonsense of watching the game. But I kept on yelling, attack, attack, because the Celtics had been so passive in the first half, and they had been passive in the last game as well. And that goes back to my point of they need to drive the basketball in order to try and score and not drive it to kick. And they finally were doing a great job of that in the third quarter. And so I was really encouraged. I was like, okay, they're starting to figure it out. They also did a way better job at attacking Steph and Jordan Poole through three quarters. They had kind of done what everybody was saying the Suns were doing to Luka, which is you get in a high pick and roll, you get the switch, and then you go at those guys, and if they send a help defender, you kick it to the open guy, which is kind of LeBron's playbook of he'll take you one-on-one until you send a guy over, but then as soon as you send a guy over, he's going to hit the open man. And so the Celtics were doing a great job of that through three quarters, and then in the fourth quarter, they just abandoned it. And I was so confused because there was multiple times where they're set up along the three-point line, and Tatum has the ball, Marcus Smart is right next to him, and Steph is right there, and instead of getting the switch on to Steph, he just decided to attack Andrew Wiggins, who's probably right now, no offense to Draymond, but saying you're the second best defender isn't really offensive, but Wiggins was on fire defensively, and they kept on trying to go at him, and it was not working, and it had been working through three quarters, and they abandoned it. So I was very confused by that because of all the time where you need to continue to do it. It's the fourth, but I think that goes into being a young team and not necessarily having the offensive discipline that the Warriors have. Another thing that was very frustrating for me was the free throw line. The Celtics shot 67.7% from the free throw line. They missed 10 free throws. If they don't miss those free throws, it is a tie game. I understand you're not going to make 100%, but even if not, an 8-point game, a 7-point game, you can cut that so much closer too. The Celtics only had 2 blocked shots as well, which is surprising given that Grant Williams had 4 or 5 in one game himself earlier in the series. So I was just pretty disappointed in the Celtics overall. They did not close, and you have to close when Steph has that game because he's not going to have multiple games like that, and you need to capitalize on that opportunity. And now going into kind of more player-specific stuff, we'll start with Draymond. Draymond was much more like himself in the first half. He was aggressive. He wasn't afraid to shoot the ball. He had 1 or 2 times where he was kind of in the paint area and kicked it when he could have gone for a layup. But for the most part, he was much improved. He had the stat line of 8, 7, and 6, and a bunch of fouls too. But he was still very good defensively, so it was not the best Draymond, but it was much better than the Draymond we had been seeing. And then I had talked in previous videos about the fact that I was okay with after Steph had his monster game, I was okay with the fact that Steph went out and won them a game. Because having watched a lot of basketball, it's very hard to go 1-on-5, and the Celtics did a great job of shutting the other 4 guys down on the Warriors. And I was okay with that, and I'm pretty sure I said that I don't think Steph can do that 2 out of the next 3 games. I was right, but the flip happened, which is Steph had the terrible game, and everybody else played pretty well. So that was, it was even more heartbreaking. Yeah, I'm still, it's 2 days later, and I'm still touchy about the subject. It's hard to be this emotionally invested and then have to talk about it and explain why they lost and how they lost and all that. Going into Steph, so, I mean, the fact that he had no three-pointers is crazy, but the Celtics, they changed up their defensive strategy after the last game, which was they decided that they were going to double Steph, and so they were staying up on him even up to the half-court line. They had somebody on his shoulder at all times, and I was impressed by Steph because he was clearly such a willing passer where there was very little ego involved, in that he knew, or he could tell early, that they were doubling him. And so he knew that it wasn't going to be his night and kept on distributing and kept on distributing. So credit to Steph on that one, because in as important of a game as that was, to be willing to take a step back and say, if they're going to double me, I'm not going to try and force it. I'm going to kick it to the open man. That takes a level of maturity. So good for Steph. And then what happened is, if last game was Steph's game, this game was the Andrew Wiggins game. Andrew Wiggins had the best game of his life the other night in Game 5. Game 4. In Game 5, he had the new best game of his life. His previous career high in rebounds was 11, and then he went 16 in Game 4 and 13 in Game 5. And he was a menace. He was locked down defensively because he has the length and the quickness and the agility to hang with all the Boston guys. And he was making these mid-range shots where I saw him make a couple in the first half, and I was like, I don't like the look of that, because he's hitting these turnarounds like he's Kobe, just hitting fadeaways, and he kept it going. So credit to Andrew Wiggins here, because he won that game for the Warriors. I mean, he was 12 of 23, so that's 52%. He was 0 of 6 from 3, but he still had 6 attempts. But he had 26 points. So it was the Wiggins game. He was dominant. He lived up to the, you're a number one pick, this is what we expect you to do, in the big moments, and he did. So all the Wiggins haters are having a very bad time because he was showing his potential. So, because his mid-range was working, and Wiggins. Going into this series, you told me that Wiggins was going to be the one to break my heart. I would have been stunned. And then, one last point about Steph. One thing I was happy as a Celtics fan Steph was doing is he was doing these long three-point, I would say heat check, but he didn't have it going, where he's just blasting a 27-footer and he was just clanging them off the front iron. And if one of them had gone in, he would have blown the roof off the place. So I understand why he was doing it, but I was happy because I'm like, I will have Steph taking those all day long. And if he makes a couple, he makes a couple. But you're going to miss more than you're going to make from that range, especially without seeing a couple go in the basket before that. So that was at least one good thing for me that Steph was doing. And then another thing that made this game really interesting was Kevon Looney was in foul trouble early, and Draymond also had some fouls early. And so part of the reason why the Celtics were able to do their attacking of Jordan Poole and Steph was because they didn't have the paint presence of Kevon Looney. And so the Warriors were forced to go small, and the Celtics were taking advantage of it for a while, but then they kind of abandoned it. But it also showed how valuable Kevon Looney was, because I think had the Celtics been shooting better, the game would have been a lot closer going into the third, because of the fact that Kevon Looney was out and Draymond also didn't play as many minutes. And honorable mention, Gary Payton. He was putting the clamps on people. But the biggest shot of the game was not a fourth quarter shot. It was Jordan Poole's half-court heave, which totally changed the momentum. So I kind of got to eat my crow here because he keeps on making those. So credit to Jordan Poole. This is terrible. Now transitioning to the Celtics here. I guess I'll do another honorable mention to the refs. They were definitely letting them play. A lot of no calls, which I'm fine with. But the Celtics did a better job about not complaining. But that's not saying much because of how much they were complaining before. It's the NBA Finals. You have to realize they're going to let them play and that they're not going to call all the fouls that you're going to get in a regular season game. So the Celtics need to work on that because it's Game 6 and Game 7 coming up. You can't be complaining about the refs. Swallow your pride, get over it, and get back on defense. You have 2 games left. You win them both, you win the championship. That's all you got to do, win 2 games in a row. So frustrating, so frustrating. Okay, now speaking of frustrating, how about Jason Tatum having 4 air balls? He was a no-show in the fourth quarter. He started out strong and was doing well. He caught fire for a section, I think it was either second quarter, where he made a couple in a row, and I was like, oh man, is he going to do it? Is this going to be the game? But fourth quarter happens, and he disappears. So he finished with 27, 10, and 4 on 50% shooting. But another thing that was deflating was he was 2 of 6 from the free throw line. I would like to look at the stats. I imagine his free throw percentage is not that much higher than his 3-point percentage. If his 3-point percentage is, let's say, around 50 or high 40s, his free throws have got to be 60 or 70%. I mean, it's pathetic. They're called free throws. You have to make them. And then another person that didn't really show up, Jaylen Brown, 18 points, 9 rebounds. Not nearly good enough. Also didn't show up in the fourth quarter. To be fair, I don't think any of the Celtics showed up in the fourth quarter, so I'm going to have to say it every time I talk about a Celtics player. And then Marcus Smart, 20 points, was fine shooting. But guess what? As we had talked about previously, 2 assists. Your starting point guard cannot have 2 assists. This is part of the reason why the Celtics offense gets so stagnant, because they don't have the true point guard to facilitate the offense. And I like Marcus Smart. I like what he brings defensively, but Steph has been playing great. I understand in today's NBA you can switch everything, and so you can't really lock one guy onto another and just say go shut him down because the offenses are set up to pick out the matchup you want. But I want more compete from him there. But I need more assists. And I also understand that the assists come when people make shots. But when you're the defensive player of the year and the point guard and you have 2 assists, 0 steals, 0 blocks, what are we doing here, guys? What are we doing? And he was just getting into it with Jordan Poole about ticky-tack calls. And yeah, the refs made some bad calls. But get over it, man. Get over it. Now, Grant Williams, another solid performance. Not his best game by any means, but certainly acceptable given what his role is on the team. He's not Anthony Davis or Nikola Jokic or Joel Embiid, so you don't expect that from him. But I didn't think he was the issue at all. He wasn't as good, but he was fine. He was not the problem. I have a question for you guys, which is, has anyone seen Al Horford? Has anyone seen him? Because I haven't seen him since the fourth quarter of Game 1. Where has he been? He's minus 19 on the night. And he shot it fine percentage-wise, but he only had 6 attempts. I want Al to have double-digit attempts. I want it to be 4 threes, maybe 5, and I want 5 in the paint. Because when he's attacking, the Celtics are a good team because he is great at finishing in the post. And he's also a very good and willing passer. And with high basketball IQ, because he's played so long, he's going to make the right decision if they come to double him and find the open man. And the Celtics get so much life when Horford, he's almost a calming influence for them. And they get so much life when he's making shots. But he was nowhere to be found. I don't know if he even went on the plane to San Francisco. Also, another issue for the Celtics, their bench. They had no bench productivity in the first half, which then forced Ime Udoka to have to play Tatum and Brown the whole second half. And the Celtics only had 10 bench points total, and some of those were in garbage minutes in the last two minutes of the game. So that is not nearly acceptable enough, because the point is that the Celtics have a deeper roster than the Warriors. And if the Celtics, the recipe for the Celtics is to have the starters play the Warriors starters even and have the bench take them over the top. Or have Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum assert themselves. But I almost feel like that's too much to ask at this point. I've yet to see it, so I feel like it's too much to ask. So the recipe is you play the starters even and you let the bench players like Grant Williams and White and Pritchard and those guys take over. But when you have no production, you can't continue to have your normal bench rotation in Game 5 of the NBA Finals if they're not doing anything. And it worked for the third quarter, but I think maybe part of the reason why Tatum and Brown played so poorly in the second half is because they had so many minutes. Maybe that's why Tatum kept on coming up short on these shots, but not. My God. So annoying. So annoying to have to talk about this. And then I think I missed Klay Thompson, so let's go to Klay. He had some big shots. He was 7 of 14 from the field, 21 points. And in Draymond's podcast after, he said, it was pretty well put, he said that Klay Thompson had the loudest 5 points in the first half he's ever seen. He said he looked up at the scoreboard to see Klay's stats, and he was like, this dude only has 5 points? What's going on? But whenever, it goes back to my point of when different people score, it has a different effect on the crowd. And Klay is one of those guys where you're so fearful of him getting hot that when he scores, and for the home crowd, for the Warriors, when he scores, the place goes berserk. So it's important to kind of keep Klay quiet. Also, third and final honorable mention of the show here, fake Klay Thompson. For those of you who have not seen this, there's a guy that looks enough like Klay Thompson, got his hair cut the same before, wearing a headband, wearing the Warriors gear, pulls up to the stadium with kind of one camera guy and in what looks to be Warriors warm-up gear, and goes in the employee/player entrance, or it was more the employee entrance, but I think players are also allowed in there, and goes right by security. They don't ask him for anything. Then a person's like, let's go get this dub tonight, Klay. And he's like, oh my God, I'm through security. He didn't lie to anybody. So did he go in a place he wasn't supposed to? Yes. He finds himself all the way out on the court. There's a basketball out there, and this is way before anybody else has shown up, definitely really early. And he starts shooting around, and he actually was pretty cash with his shots. But then he airballed a layup, and I think people started to notice, and I think he was out there for roughly 10 minutes before security came over and asked him to leave. And then they took his tickets. He had bought $10,000 tickets to the game. What's crazy to me is that I said $10,000 tickets, and it didn't feel like an astronomical number given ticket prices these days. I was looking to go to Game 5 the other night, and Game 5... Game 4, and Game 4, and it was $1,000 for bleacher seats, for all the way up in the balcony, like 20 rows up in the balcony, probably 7 rows from the back, $1,000, which is outrageous. But the Warriors banned him from the facility for life, which I thought was kind of sad. At least let the guy go to the game because he paid for the tickets. He didn't lie to anybody. It's on the Warriors' security, too. They got to not let him in. But that was another funny thing. And so you should go check out his YouTube video. And I think now he's rooting for the Celtics because the Warriors banned him for life. And now let's preview Game 6. So it's very simple. The Celtics must win. That's all you got to do. You got to win. You got to force Game 7. The things that I am looking for the Celtics to do is not turn it over, because when they're careful with the ball, they win, and when they're not, they lose. Don't need to go into that any more than we have the last 4 times. And then they also need to push pace in order to not let the Warriors get set in their half-court defense. I've been very impressed with the Warriors defensively. They have done a really great job, I would say, for pretty much all of the series. But their defense has gotten tighter and tighter, which has made the Celtics offense look worse and worse as the series gone on. So I'm looking for the Celtics to push pace, to not let the Warriors get set. But I also need them to not be as reckless with the ball. There was a lot of passes that were kind of carefree passes that the Warriors just jumped, and then like Draymond was a prime example, and went down and scored. And so they need to take care of the ball more. And I'm also looking for Jason Tatum to have another elimination Jason Tatum game. He was great in the Milwaukee series. He was great in the Miami series. And I said maybe game 5 would be a good time for him to turn on. I think Game 6 would be an even better time. And then Marcus Smart needs to facilitate. You got to do it. You got to do it. And then for the Celtics defensively, I don't know where I stand anymore on this issue. Was previously, as I had talked about, that I'm fine. I was fine at one point when the series was tied. I was fine with us letting Steph try and beat us single-handedly. I was fine with that. But now, after his last shooting performance, he's going to come out firing, red hot, and I don't know if I feel comfortable with that anymore, because now I have no wiggle room. So do you want to let the best shooter of all time potentially shoot you to end your season and win the championship on your home court? I don't really like that strategy. But the Warriors are almost harder to stop when Wiggins and Klay Thompson and Jordan Poole and Gary Payton and Draymond and Kevon Looney are all getting involved and all getting their touches. So I don't really know how I feel anymore. I have kind of had a change of heart. It'll be interesting to see the Celtics' defensive plan, because if they start doubling Steph again and Steph kicks it to Wiggins and Wiggins gets it going, the Celtics now know Wiggins can beat them. I am also very worried for... There are lots of memes on the internet about kind of best players in NBA history, where it's like masked LeBron, flu game, Michael Jordan with the flu, Kobe on Jalen Rose, stuff like that. And the number 1 on that list is Game 6 Klay Thompson. If I have to hear Mike Breen yell bang because Klay Thompson in Game 6 of the NBA Finals hits a dagger, I might have to turn off the television. I don't know if I can unhear that. And so I pray I do not have to, but I am so fearful that I do, because Klay is so lethal and he's getting his mojo back and his shooting percentage is slowly going up. And Klay was also really great defensively last game too. I forgot to mention that earlier. He was locking it down just like old Klay. And so, to say I'm worried is definitely an understatement. As for the Warriors, what I think they need to do in Game 6 is continue their great defense, but they need to be more cognizant of getting fouls early in the game. They have been kind of shooting themselves in the foot, where each game there's been a Warrior with foul trouble early, whether it's Draymond or Steph or Kevon Looney. Somebody is getting early fouls, and it forces Steve Kerr to play the rotations he probably doesn't want to, because he has to manage the minutes. And so if the Warriors can stay out of foul trouble early and get it to the second half, because Steve Kerr is fine playing these guys with 5 fouls in an elimination game, because all you need to do is close out the game and you're good. If you get a big enough lead, you're fine. You win. So I'm looking to see if the Warriors can kind of stay disciplined, I think is the word I'm looking for, disciplined with their fouls. And I'm also fearful because the Warriors have been here so many times, and they can definitely close this deal. And I know they can close the deal because I've seen them close the deal. And my one thing, or my 2 things that I'm holding out hope for, are a great Tatum or Jaylen Brown game, but also that this Celtics team is not going to lose 3 games in a row. That's very unlike them. They hadn't lost 2 games in a row all playoffs until last game, but for them to suddenly go from not losing 2 games in a row to then losing 3 games in a row would be definitely a brutal way to end the season, where at least if they force a game 7 and they lose, I can go into next season knowing we were 1 game away from beating the Warriors, who are the best team and have true championship DNA, and that this was their first finals. And I think there's no shame in going to game 7 versus a great team and losing. But having a 2-1 lead in the series and losing in 6 is really tough. And so it's amazing how 1 game can change the future of so many players and coaches and all of those things. So it's going to be an incredible game. The Garden is going to be rocking. Today's an awesome sports day in Boston. There's the U.S. Open at the Country Club in Brookline. There's a day Red Sox game, and then there's NBA Finals in the evening. So awesome day for Boston sports. I think that's everything I wanted to cover. Go Celtics. If I had to make a prediction, oof. Why do I do this to myself? I don't need to include this segment of me making a prediction for you guys, but give me 5 seconds. I'm going to ride with the Celtics. I'm going to ride with them. They're not going to lose 3 in a row. I don't know how they're going to win. I don't care if it's by 1 point or 100. Oh, God, I want them to win. Yeah, go Celtics. We got this. Belief. Well, I will definitely have a debrief for you after the next game. Hopefully it's positive and I get to preview Game 7 with you and talk about how great the Celtics are and how they had 0 turnovers and how Steph and Clay had 0 points and Draymond fouled out and all that. But, yeah, we'll talk soon. Go Celtics, and thanks for listening.